Welcome to the Autumn Native Creatives programme delivered to you by Festival Bridge in Norwich. I know some of you are from the region. It's lovely to see those familiar faces. Festival Bridge cover Norfolk, Suffolk, Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, but I know that we have a big contingent from the north of England because we are supported by Susan, Coles, and in fact I think we've had people from Russia and Australia before, so it's lovely to see you all. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We've talked about the recording. Penny is happy to take questions during or at the end. You can either pop them into the chat box if you would, if you're not happy about speaking out loud, or just pop up your the hands icon on Zoom and we will endeavour to find you and you can ask your own question. If you'd rather I ask the question, though, that's totally fine, but I know that Penny would like interaction, so if you're feeling up for it, please do ask any questions. The first thing I'd like to just say very quickly is that I'm trying to put together an impact study for Native Creatives to see how these sessions are impacting on you as professional educators and as practicing artists. So if you are able to at some point pop any work that you're making or performances you're doing or exhibitions you're going to or work you're doing in the classroom into the Padlet, which we've put, I'm hoping that Laura will put into the chat box now. And you can feel free to just populate it whenever you want. That would be fantastic, but it's a really good way for me to show Arts Council that this is worth doing and that Festival Bridge are impacting on our teachers. So that is the first thing. The second thing is we're going to put a Padlet in at the end so that we can collect your feedback from this specific session. We really welcome your thoughts, either on what Penny has talked about or what you think is good about Native Creatives or what you think we can improve on or what you'd like to see in the future. So please feel free to do that at the end. It's really important for us to get that feedback as well. So moving on. This Native Creatives programme is we're now into our fourth session of Native Creatives. It's our second academic year. It's entitled Interdisciplinary Creativity and Co-Creation. And we've developed this programme from listening to you, the teachers and the artist educators. And we wanted to develop, we want to know how to develop the creative arts without working alone and within our comfortable parameters. We want to be able to help you diversify your creative approach. So this means finding opportunities to work with others in other areas of creativity, to benefit yourself as an artist or your teaching practice. And by interdisciplinary, we mean combining your personal art form with another, by taking a cross-curricular approach within the arts, or by working in collaboration with an artist or an arts organisation. So it seemed really fitting that I welcome our first guest to the autumn programme. Dr. Penny Hay is an artist and an educator dedicated to transformative teaching and learning. She's worked in education since 1983. Now at Bath Spa University, she is Reader in Creative Teaching and Learning and Senior Lecturer in Arts Education. Impressively, she was instrumental in setting up the National Artist Teacher Scheme with Arts Council England and NSEAD that offers teachers the opportunity to develop their own creative practice. Penny's most renowned projects include Forest of Imagination, House of Imagination and School Without Walls, and her doctoral research was focused on how, as adults, we support children's identity as artists. She focused on teachers' professional development through creative practice, working with schools, culture centres and artists, and her work is underpinned by a clear set of values and a focus on innovation and creativity. Penny has asked that you post any artworks, artistic learning environments or favourite quotes that you've brought to this session on, guess what, another Padlet, which is in the chat box. Hopefully you will, by opening all three, you'll find the right one. I think I've labelled them correctly. So we are absolutely thrilled and really, really fortunate that we have Penny kicking off our first session for this Native Creatives programme. Thank you, Penny, and over to you.
Thank you, Jen, and hi everyone. It's just such a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted, and it's great to see so many familiar faces in the room, but also new faces, or some people I've only met on Twitter or Instagram, so you're really welcome. That was a bit of a mad introduction, but essentially I'm an artist and an educator and a researcher. I'm absolutely committed to the role of the artist educator, and that permeates all of my work. So I've prepared a presentation that's very conversational in that I would love you to contribute either in the chat or ask a question with a big Q in front of it. Jen will look after that, and to really think about your role and how I can help you as well. Some of you know our signature projects, which is great, and hopefully some of you it'll be the first introduction. So I'm going to focus on the notion of kind of participation, collaboration, co-inquiry, our phrase creative provocation, and absolutely imagination. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I've in response to the festival theme, I'm going to focus on interdisciplinary creativity and co-creating artistic learning environments, which I just said to Jen in our informal chats, you know, this is what I get up in the morning to do every day. So whether I'm taking this in my role as a reader or research fellow or director of research for the charity that is now called House of Imagination, we were called 5 by 5, but we renamed our charity in memory of the late Sir Ken Robinson, who is our patron for 20 years. So importantly, the work is interrogating different kinds of artistic learning environments and co-designing them, co-creating them, and really showing what's possible in moving forwards towards more informal, but also more creative and more imaginative learning environments together. So I can see Susan's on the call, so I hope you're smiling. So I'm a big fan of Bob and Roberta Smith's work, Patrick Brill, and I really do believe this, that art is your human right and that all schools should be art schools. So this is what I try and live out every day as an artist, as an educator and a researcher, that, you know, to see that creativity daily, to see that sense of alongsideness with children and young people. So like many of you, I trained in fine art and education, and I specialised as an early years primary and special needs teacher. I focused in on children and young people who were potentially disengaged from learning, and I re-engaged them in their learning through the arts. So working with children in informal schooling, alternative provision, pupil referral units, small schools, etc. And then obviously always in the state system. But here's one of the participants in my work who I met him when he was 10 and he wanted to do everything through film and animation. And he's just been in charge of the design of the Vimeo for Bake Off, which is he's also just won a BAFTA. So I was lucky, as Jen said, to work in London for nearly 10 years. And I worked initially at the Institute of Education. After being a primary teacher and working in alternative provision, I worked in Glasgow for a year with the Year of Culture and co-designed a City of Imagination festival across the city with children, young people and galleries. And then coming back to work at the Institute of Education and taking a lead with child development and art and design. I was lucky to work with Charlotte Berman and then moved to Goldsmiths and work closely with artists like Inka Shona Barry. If you haven't seen his exhibition at Tate, I totally recommend it. It's my daughter that sent me all of those photographs. So as Jen said, you know, I was fortunate to be part of a team alongside Viv Rice at the Arts Council and NSCAD, and we co-designed the Artist Teacher Scheme at Tate Modern. So while I was working at Goldsmiths 2 years before Tate Modern opened, really thinking about the role of the artist teacher, you know, teachers who were given the opportunity then to revisit their own creative practice as artists. And for me, those 2 years being at Tate Modern without the public and working with schools and having opportunities to think about, well, what is learning? Where is learning? How can we think about contemporary art practice and learning together, about being in the world, manifesting that democracy and creativity and artistic practice daily. So at the same time, I travelled back to Bath for my job down here. The main reason was to have my own child, who's now 20. So Tate Modern opened in 2020, and just the idea that I could bring my skills back to this region. So testing out these ideas with children, I was inspired by the 100 Languages of Exhibition, 100 Languages of Children exhibition at in Bristol, and thinking about children's inquiries. So I proposed a project called 5 by 5, which was 5 artists, 5 galleries, 5 settings, and then we're now in our 21st year, and as I said, we're now called House of Imagination. But I travelled over to Italy to do some research with the schools and settings in Reggio Emilia in Italy, and thinking about the idea of following children's inquiries, following children's fascinations, but also on the right and in Bristol with an exhibition with Christian Boltanski, thinking about the role of the contemporary artist in this process. So children alongside real art in the world, being in the world with real art. So we invited children, young people to literally follow their fascinations and bring their inquiries to the classroom, inside and outside. So here the children thinking about bringing the outside inside. So they wanted to turf their classroom with real grass, and here photographer Andy Kemp in the corner working alongside the children to document their learning, but with them. You can see their own photographs on the wall at the side. And their inquiries were fascinating. So on the right-hand side, you know, how big does a map have to be inside it? I think that's a quote from Borges, you know, thinking about a cartographer that made a map the size of the world. So children following their inquiries over a period of time, and that became very important. Just as in Reggio Emilia, the progettazione is about following the smoke, following children's ideas, and then co-designing creative environments together. So then we conceived the idea of these pop-up houses of imagination, which is, so obviously our charity is now called that. But alongside Sir Ken, so Ken and I met Ken in '89. I think Jen was giving my age away there. But I met Ken in '89 and we worked together since on all our futures. And he was a patron of our charity for 20 years. And it was a tragedy that we lost him last August. But when he visited Bath University, we had a conference called the Creative Revolution, working alongside children to co-design an environment here on the Marble Run on our media wall, working with a professor of interactive art, but also one of my student teachers on the right, but working with a class of children in residence in the university. On the right-hand side, my students having their own art sessions in the local galleries in Bath, in the area. We have 12 beautiful museums and galleries that we can, well, all COVID dependent, but we can frequent and be alongside real art to understand the impact and the value of the arts in our lives. The bottom left, there's a conversation with children who are 10 to 13, thinking about school. What is school? What is learning? Where is learning? And here the students had co-designed this space in their secondary school for the feeder primary school, but also for their peers across the world. So this conversation is between Ridlington and Rwanda and Serbia and Spain. The middle image is a maths lesson. It's alongside our professor Alf Coles, who papered a gallery and brought the whole graph paper into all of the space in the gallery, and then invited children to co-design the maths lessons so that they were thinking about number patterns. They were thinking, in fact, they invented trigonometry. So very important to bring children into these different cultural spaces, that learning is everywhere. And one of our signature projects, you may know, is School Without Walls. So really thinking about the opportunity for children to co-design their learning alongside adults that care, adults who are companions in their learning. So myself with the director of the Egg Theatre in Bath, Kate Cross, who said, well, let's just do School at the Egg. So working with our artists, our students, the children. Sadly, the tallest member there is Sue East, who sadly died from cancer a couple of years ago, but everything in her memory now, just as in Ken's legacy, we're living it out daily. So we although we have all curriculum coverage, it's more than just meeting the requirements of a national curriculum. It's about the children seeing themselves as active citizens, that they have agency in learning, and that the relationships alongside the children are absolutely important. Every child has a sketchbook, a learning journal, and they're given real world learning. So they work in the cafe, they design props in the design department, they're thinking about themselves as artists. Everyone is an artist and everyone is creative. So with adults as role models here, so a theatre group sharing their stories, their multidisciplinary, multimodal performance that involve tech and music and puppetry and dance. And then the children having some of those same skills to then take to their own designs up in the studio above the theatre, so that they can try ideas out, working alongside creative professionals of all art forms, but also scientists and engineers and philosophers, environmentalists. We take the children to the woods, we take the children to the studio at the art school during the degree show, so they can see our students living out this way of being in the world. The children co-designed this beautiful canvas around the blue and green of the city. They were thinking about their perspective of the river, and the river running through Bath, the river running through us. Andrew Grant, who's the co-designer of Forest for Imagination, talks about curating the blue and green of the city. It's a beautiful way to think about where you live and how you respond to the environment. And we also take over empty spaces in the city to have a gallery of learning, to share the learning with parents and carers and guardians, so that everybody can see the learning. It's made visible and everybody can feel part of the process. It's not just something that happens in school. So School Without Walls is about breaking down the barriers between the school cultural centres, but also that everybody can be part of that community of learners. And what does a creative school look like? You know, here we're seeing this made visible. We're having exhibitions, we're having creativity fairs, we're inviting Richard Long in to come and talk to the children about their work. You know, here this is part of my PhD, where I worked with the same group of children for 5 years to document their learning and showing their interests emerge. So this child who was fascinated by pattern and landscape, and that permeated her whole exhibition and body of work for her primary school years, and she's still in touch. In fact, she held a brilliant conversation with Richard Long at the recent Forest for Imagination. And also here another child who's obsessed with monsters and mountains, and thinking about not only smaller scale work in sketchbooks, but also large scale work inside and outside. And we also work with families. So here a project in Bristol where we're working with some communities where we're focusing on playing alongside children and people. So the adults' role in playing alongside the children in order to see their creativity, in order to understand their creativity, so that it's not a surprise and it's not something that's a slippery concept. It's in all of us and it's innate. So Forest for Imagination is our other signature project, thinking about how we can bring creativity and imagination and our connectedness to nature into the city. As I said, the co-founder is Andrew Grant, whose beautiful signature project is Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. You've probably seen him on his work on Planet Earth. I think he's also been interviewed. So each year we take over a familiar space and we bring an immersive creative environment right into the public realm, so that we can have a conversation about not only in response to climate change and the ecological emergency, but also importantly to see our own imagination and coming up with imaginative solutions together. So working with our design students, working with local schools, working with my PGCE students to actually engage the community. Toby Thompson, who's an international spoken word poet, working with us over several years to think about young people's ideas in the city. He's a storyteller. You know, we have a storyteller in our city of imagination. And Andrew very beautifully bringing a child's drawing to life with an eco bunny to think about how we can think about looking after the creatures in the world. Each year, so here with the University of Bath, working with the architecture students and alongside Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination, we're still working together now. And in fact, thanks to Susan, we made a creative provocation in the APPG for art, craft and design education the other day to think about these spaces of liberated learning. Thinking about taking over the river, your learning, your classroom is a light classroom by the river. It's in the square. It's right in the centre of Bath. This event in 2018 was co-designed with a local special school, and our absolute mission was that it was universally accessible. And so a child in a wheelchair who could only blink, and it was definitely for her. And then taking over unusual spaces. So here's Shai Akram, who's actually now a trustee of our charity. She works at the Royal College of Art and the Thesis Platform for Design, co-designing an installation around bioluminescence with children and for children and young people. And the last full-blown live event was in 2019 at the Holborn, where we had over 10,000 visitors over 5 days. But here, working with Room 13 and Plymouth College of Art, the local hospital, who've designed an eco garden for the patients most impacted by COVID, and working with our colleagues in Barcelona on our Interstice project. And also serious themes emerge out of this work. So Piers Taylor and Charlie Brentnell co-designed a forest beacon, a beacon of hope, and a nod to the homeless in the city. As Bath is misconceived as a white middle-class city, but it has pockets of deprivation that are absolutely heartbreaking. And obviously in 2020, we pivoted to a digital platform where we were going to take over this beautiful Art Deco cinema, but instead rewilding the city, we invited artists to pass the baton to each other over the period of time from last summer to 10-10-20, the TED Countdown Summit. So Andrew Amundsen worked with us in Berlin. Alf Coles, our mathematician from the University of Bristol, designed a mirror maze. We worked with families on pop-up House of Imagination, a summer play scheme for the schools and families most impacted by COVID. So that was all about nature, nurture, care, joy, creativity, food. And then a launch on 10-10-20 with, because of COVID, we've been exploring that international space. So we were able to more easily then work with colleagues in Zimbabwe and across the world on interactive and co-designed participatory projects that really profiled imaginative solutions to the ecological emergency. And then this last year, we travelled across Bath from the university's new campus, Locksbrook, on the river, and Beckford's Tower, Bath City Farm, down to the Secret Garden at Bath Eastern, and over to the American Museum and Holborn. So we had beautiful 2 weekends and immersive workshops with schools and families across the period of time, all in a hybrid offer so that it was all COVID safe. And then the installation at the American Museum stayed up for 3 months, which was then inviting families to go back and revisit the spaces that we designed around the senses alongside their beautiful gardens. So this designed by Matthew Leese, and one of our former design students who's still working with us. And then just this September, it's just closed. We worked with Andrew Amundsen and Sasha, you can see in the top left corner, in Berlin. So they were working with the team alongside Elifia Eliasson studio in Berlin, but with our design students, and Rose's idea about, you know, the idea of a living tree in the egg. So Kate Cross at the egg said to me, "Help, Penny, we've got an empty theatre, what should we do?" And I said, well, it's easy, just put a forest inside it. So together we worked over several months, and luckily Andrew was able to visit the egg and see the space and see it come to fruition. But working with the living forest in the main theatre in the auditorium, with the roots in the cafe and the canopy up in the studio at the top. And we did actually manage to bring a real forest to the egg. So we looked after the creative ecosystems, we looked after the spiders and the bugs, don't tell Kate. And we also were able to replace this moss forest back into the woods where we were lent these ferns from Andrew Grant and from the forest team. So here in the cafe area of the Egg Theatre, the mycelium and the networks, these are all listening flowers that talk to each other, 50 meters of talking tubes, and then in the auditorium bringing that space to life. We worked alongside Squid Soup and Roxana Vilk from the Vilk Collective, where they brought 120 orbs that were responsive to sound and light into the space. So performances over the 2 weekends to really think about forests in our life, that, as Andrew says, you know, we are all forests. There is a forest in all of us. We are imagination. Forest of Imagination is the home of imagination. Imagination is our home. So Margaret Heffernan visited during the installation, and this is what she said. It's so interesting to think about how we used to frame forests as scary, dangerous places, and are now telling such a different story of caretaking. I can't think of anything I've seen that expresses that better or with more delight, given how traumatic the climate crisis will be for the younger generation. That some should grow up with a love of nature seems to me to be a deeply positive and hopeful statement. So thinking about children as stewards of the environment, we co-designed some creative adventure boxes with Lucy Cassidy and James Baldwin. So the Society for the Protection of Magical Creatures for younger children, and for older teens to think about the idea of a Innocentville, a kind of series of 11 narratives that the students can choose their own endings. So here's Lucy and the Society for the Protection of the Magical Creatures, and allowing children and their families to come in and adopt a magical creature to look after them for life. But just to finish on a more serious note, we have got a fantastic project with the BBC called the Rabbit Holes Collective, which is with a team of artists, tech wizards, multidisciplinary scientists, exploring the data around the roots of the forest, collecting sounds in the canopy and of birdsong. And we're together co-designing these adaptive podcasts so that young people can metaphorically fall down a rabbit hole and connect more deeply to the natural world. So that's an ongoing project and now aligned with Forest of Imagination. But I suppose I just wanted to end with a message of, you know, because it is now COP26, it's even more important that children and young people are given the opportunity to co-design moments of action, inviting that creative action, that creative activism. You know, artists are activists. And I think it is important that they've never been so vital in expressing our urgent kind of existential crisis. So on a note of hope and taking hope into action, to think about how together we can come up with these innovative and imaginative solutions for change. And one example is our project in India, where we're working alongside children in informal settlements, where they're designing a living lab so that their curriculum comes out of that life experience of reimagining waste and work. And it really is about life and survival. So I'm going to finish on the note of City of Imagination and invite some requests and responses from you, some questions. So it's been fantastic to work alongside City of Imagination colleagues, so Margaret Heffernan, young people in the city, our senior leadership team at the university, Sue Rigby, our VC, and thinking about the city as a campus for learning. So thinking about how young people, we've literally put that in the hands of our young people. How can we co-design a city of imagination? What might that look like? So I'll share that film with you, and I'm sure Jen will share it in the notes after the session. But just to end with a lovely moment to remember Ken's legacy and how we can live this out daily. He said that imagination is the source of all human achievement. I really believe that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Penny. That was absolutely fascinating. So many things that you mentioned there that, I mean, I know quite a lot about you from knowing you for a little while and reading lots about you, but there's lots that I'd never heard you say before or never read before. So I'm particularly interested in children's participatory art and the kind of idea of co-creation, but to hear you talk about it in that kind of immersive creative environment and a liberated learning, all kind of, I don't know, just sort of phrases and words that have never come to me before. Thinking about curating and responding cultural spaces, I think is really fascinating. Really exciting work, and I'm sure that everybody on this call will have lots of questions and be just as excited as I am. I know that Susan already had a question popped in there. Susan, you want to just ask it yourself?
Yes. I was just wondering, Penny, if like in 100 years' time, when we're probably not going to be here, and people were looking back on this generation, I wonder what you would want the legacy of the post-pandemic generation to be in the far future when people look back on us.
That is such a brilliant question, Susan. I think that what we should work towards for the next few years as an urgent initiative to happen, this is what I would want people in 100 years to see. I would want to see not a national curriculum, but I'd want to see these spaces for liberated learning. I'd want to see different versions of how children and young people can show that they are brilliant learners, that they find that intrinsic motivation to learn, not just through the arts, but in the arts, about the arts, through the arts, but also bringing creativity into every aspect of their lives. So that notion of self-directed inquiry, purposeful learning, real life learning that actually brings, that's why contemporary art practice is so important, because it makes visible every day those questions that artists are asking. And it shows the habits of minds of artists to be curious, to be connected, to be creative, to ask good questions, to not know, to be uncertain, to go wrong, to fail. That's fine. And I think if we could put the emphasis on a more dispositional way of learning, rather than it be to do with content and facts and knowledge being delivered to children as empty vessels, I think that's what I would like to look back and see. This was the revolution post-pandemic, let's hope, reimagining learning to put all the C's, creativity, critical thinking, compassion, collaboration, curiosity, climate, I could go on, all of them right at the heart of the way children learn. And then children would be more motivated. Now, I'll end now on a lovely quote, one of my favourite quotes from Reggio Emilia, where Loris Malaguzzi said, if children see themselves as authors and inventors, then their interests and motivations explode, or something like that. But absolutely, good question.
Thank you. Has anyone else got anything that they want to raise with Penny right now? She is excellent on Twitter, if you follow Penny. So if you do think of anything later, I'm sure she'd be very happy to respond. I've got a question actually. Claire, would you like to ask something?
Just a really quick one. Are you funded by the Arts Council to do all these amazing projects?
Ooh, okay, this is being filmed. Sometimes, yes, sometimes we are. Good question, Claire. So yes, so I've shared with you 21 years of our work with the charity that was 5x5 and now House of Imagination, and now we're affiliated with Barcelona University, which has really been useful because in my role as a reader and research fellow, I'm interrogating these sites of experimental learning daily. That's my job as a researcher. With my director of research hat on the charity, I'm inviting artists and creative professionals, cultural professionals to come and work with us and co-design these projects. So every year for 21 years, and probably before that, I think with the Artist Teacher Scheme, we have made applications to the Arts Council every single year. I have spent a lot of my time on Grantium, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not. So for instance, obviously our Forest of Imagination application in 2020 was frozen because of COVID. However, they did give our charity, we had to apply for it, but we were successful in getting £25,000 emergency funding. Otherwise, the charity may have hit the wall. And we devoted 10% of that budget alongside Bath Cultural Education Partnership team, the Egg Theatre, the Holborn, Bath Festivals and so on, working alongside the university, who also put in place a digital intern as in-kind support. And we devoted 10% of that work to design those beautiful creative adventure boxes unboxed, the one like the images I showed you just now. And they were specifically for the families most impacted by COVID. And then this last year, our Forest of Imagination bid, which was for 2 years, scored highly on every single aspect. It couldn't have got better results, but we hit a table in terms of competition for funding. And so cultural centres were being saved, you know, that were going to go to the wall. And so Forest was resilient, and we managed to put the travelling forest on because we had some match funding, but we weren't successful with Arts Council. However, we will be putting in another application imminently for next year's project. So it is an annual request. Yeah, good question.
Thanks, Claire. Has anyone else got any questions they'd like to ask Penny right now? I have a question about when you're involved in participatory work, whether it's children or with a community group or children and their parents, is there ever any controversy in where the ownership lies of the process or the piece that's made, that kind of, you know, creativity ownership?
That's another excellent question, Jen. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because the answer is no, because the IP, the intellectual property, belongs to everyone. And I think, I mean, a good example is Forest and the Rabbit Holes Collective, because everybody has an investment in co-designing the ideas. And in each project, we work as a community of practice. So I don't lead the project, I'm just part of the team. I hold it, and I'm, you know, obviously with Forest, Andrew Grant and I are kind of the co-founders, we co-curate it, but each year we invite artistic responses from artists, creative cultural professionals, but also from the community. And we always work with local schools, depending on the funding that's available at the time and the capacity of the team. But yes, genuinely it's co-designed. And the same with School Without Walls, you know, that project was started with the Egg Theatre and House of Imagination and one local primary school in Bath. And now over the 11 years, we've worked with 12 schools, including one secondary. And everybody feels that they have ownership. Everybody's part of the process of co-designing and working alongside our students in the university, but also teachers in schools, the parent community, and always having that sense of shared celebration of the learning. So everybody feels that they're part of it. In fact, I remember very clearly, I didn't show the image, or maybe I should have done, but there was one year when the Anne Ofsted inspector turned up in a trench coat, and the children's project that morning was a maths session on, they were spies finding each other around the city, and all safeguarding in place in the groups. And she arrived, and the head teacher sent me a text saying the Ofsted inspector's on her way, but I thought it was a joke because she turned up with this trench coat on. I thought it was an actor from The Egg. I went up and embraced her and said, I love your coat, how fantastic that you dressed up as a spy, you know, etc, etc. Anyway, it was the Ofsted inspector, and they did get an outstanding for that session.
And what was her response like when you gave her that cuddle?
It was metaphorical. It was pre-COVID. It was very much about, you know, involving that particular inspector in a conversation about child-initiated inquiry, child-informed learning, student-informed learning. I think that's where my PhD was very much about. She says, passing it on here, I am writing it up at the moment as a book called Children Are Artists. But it's really very much about what I said earlier about finding that intrinsic motivation to learn and to be an artist, to be a mathematician, to be a scientist.
Yeah, really fascinating. I know that there is lots I want to ask you and pick your brains out about, but if anybody's got any questions right at the end, and we didn't get to do your Padlet, Penny.
Don't worry. Well, I think it would be really good to think about, you know, this as your own inquiry, to think if you were to bring an example of co-design, co-curation, co-creation, all of the co's, if you would bring an image to the room. I mean, for instance, I'm a big fan, Susan knows this, I'm a big fan of the Steve McQueen event that was all about involving the year 3 classes in kind of co-production. And for me, that was significant because it was around the themes of social justice and inclusion, that everybody matters, no matter what your background or your circumstance, everybody's voice matters. And that's why I'm absolutely committed to the state system, that every child should have a creative and democratic education.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think everybody on this call would completely agree with that. This has been brilliant, Penny, and we could go on for hours and hours, and I'm really hoping that I am the lucky one who gets to do that with Penny on another occasion. Thank you very, very much for sharing your wise words of wisdom with us, and for sharing the work that you've been doing. I know, as I said before, Penny is really, really brilliant at sharing work and sharing things that are going on Twitter, so do follow her. I don't know whether Laura is able to just post, or do you want to, Penny, what is your Twitter handle?
Yes, but I mean, so my personal one, where I try not to get too political, but is Pen A. Hay. Penny Hay already exists in New Zealand as a brilliant architect, but yes, and the charity, that's good to follow those. So House of Imagination and Forest of Imagination. I think you've got those, Laura, as well on my form that I sent, but I can quickly type them in if that helps.
And if not, if you follow me, I follow all of those as well, so you can always get access in that way. But we can share everything that if anybody needs it at a later date. We're going to have to wrap up now, because we've got our next speaker, Sian Fan, coming up at 5:30. If you haven't booked on already for the next session, please do, because she is an amazing augmented reality artist who uses the body and movement within her art, and she's going to show us how to use some of the programs that she uses to make her work. So it's going to be fantastic. But once again, thank you very, very much, Penny. It's really nice to see you. We're getting a little round of applause from Susan there. Thank you very, very much, and see you soon.
Thank you for having me, everyone. I'll pop my websites in the chat for you as well.
That would be great, and we'll leave the Padlets open for feedback if anybody would like to contribute to the feedback, or to the impact study, or to Penny's Padlet page as well. That would be great. But we'll hopefully see you all in 15 minutes.
Great. See you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.